Good morning, everyone. Tim Boyko here, and we are here talking about an amazing topic, the emotional intelligence advantage of women. And so I'm excited to learn about this. I'm going to give you off to the wonderful coach, Ron Kardashian.
Thank you, Tim. You're always such an esteemed co-partner. I appreciate you. We're going to dive right into this. This is Women Empowering Month, and I think probably the best topic I can talk about is the emotional intelligence advantage of women and why the future of leadership may depend on emotional intelligence. So I've got multiple cameras going here. So if I'm not looking directly at you, I am looking at you. I'm looking at you and all of my crew, my big crew here of two. For decades, the world believed leadership meant authority, control, dominance, but modern neuroscience right now is changing the game because it's revealing something different about mankind, men and women. But the leaders who perform the best that I've seen in my practice now of 25 years, they are not the loudest voices in the room. They're the most emotionally regulated, intelligent, emotionally intelligent, not just brilliance, not just IQ, but EQ. And then something else we've introduced here at my coaching company is AQ, which is your ability to adapt, an area I needed some major, major help in. So I want to talk about the research today just to start off because it's increasingly showing that women possess they possess a powerful advantage over men a lot of the times. Not all women and not all men. So this isn't I'm better than you. It's just they have some advantages in areas where men don't. One of them was a major leadership analysis covering about, I don't know how many, but it was a 360-degree leadership evaluation found that women outperform men, what was it, 12 to 1? Oh, in 12 of the 16 most important leadership competencies that they outperformed men, including initiative. This is a huge one for you women, resilience, collaboration, and of course, relationship building. I just tell you, I've learned more from women on relationships than I have from men. I had a mentor years ago who I absolutely loved. I had to fire him because he wasn't married. And so his perspective was limited. I use that term lightly, by the way. I didn't say you're fired. I just said, it's time to move on because who you associate with whatever level that they've achieved, if you've passed them up, it's just time for you to advance. So it's almost like thank you for what you did and then you move on. But this is huge. Now, let's talk about the neuroscience of this because I want you to see the traits first to substantiate how you're going to advance today because it's all about your advancement, because emotional intelligence is not just about personality. I want to clarify that. It's neurological and it involves the integration of several things, critical systems. I always talk about this: the frontal lobe, the decision maker, the limbic system, which is the emotions, right? How you process. And of course, one that I'm absolutely in love with is the vagus nerve. It's the only nerve in the body that basically bypasses the spine, whoop, lifts right down into the left, I believe is the ventricle or the atrium. I don't have that note in front of me, but it deposits right into the heart. And this is what governs heart regulation, which is something I'm going to be talking about for the rest of my life. In fact, my new book coming out has done a deep dive in the space of neurotheology. So, science, biblical literature converge for the ultimate authority in human transformation. And it is, I just give glory to God because I couldn't write something so beautiful. I'm the sum total of all of the advisors I've had, all of the researchers who have gone before me, all the great theologians, all the great scientists, and it's just truly an honor to put together this literary work. Should be coming out this year, so look for it. Um, but I want to talk about when these systems are aligned. What happens to your leadership ability? Well, one, you become more calm under pressure. Huge for the leaders that I'm coaching. World leader stage. I have a few world leaders that I coach. Calm under pressure. Empathy and communication, huge. An area that I was majorly deficient in. I think probably one of my biggest struggles growing up was dysregulation. Financial pressure would hit, dysregulated. Coping mechanisms increase: drinking, over the counter substance abuse, drugs, illicit material online. I mean, when I work with men and even women, because I'm a confidant and the first thing you sign is an NDA, I don't tell anybody our business, not my own family, nobody. They'd have to kill me before they got it out of me. And people believe that sincerely about me. That's what I do. And so, with that, creates this safe environment where we take off the armor. And the biggest lie in psychological therapy is hold it inside. Don't tell anybody. Suppress it until it goes away. The biggest problem you can do. The obesity increased, biological ailments increased, osteoporosis, stroke, heart disease. We wonder why these are at an all time high, is because these systems are not aligned. So, and specifically when you're running a company, organizations need to increase the prioritization of these skills. It's not just let's increase the vision or the culture, let's increase the behaviors that are behind this. As a behavioral specialist, the area of my greatest attack has become the area of my greatest strength. I understand it. In fact, Harvard Business School Online reports that 71% of employers, they value emotional intelligence more than technical skills. And to me, that is just groundbreaking when they evaluate leadership potential. So now here's where women excel, because research repeatedly shows that you guys score higher in several of these traits. One of them is empathy, relational awareness, communication, collaboration. And those aren't soft skills, those are stability skills where you become a very stable person. And the outcome of that is production. In fact, studies examine leadership during crises found that women were often rated as more effective leaders in high pressure situations. To me, that's brilliant. Why? Because crisis leadership, crisis leadership requires something more powerful than control. It requires emotional regulation. And that is the sweet spot. So this is where our technology has been a game changer for a lot of women, in that I bring in our higher behavioral analytics. This is an intelligence platform, behavioral intelligence. This isn't personality assessment. This is explaining what are the behaviors behind why I became who I became. Wow. Once you can go back to that root system and begin to alter it, the outcomes are 100x, 50x, even 10x, even 2x. But we're seeing complete turnaround. I'm living proof. I used to say in hair transplant, I'm not only the CEO, I'm the client. I am a client of my own product. I mean, I adapted this 30 years ago in my practice. And I remember when I got the report, you remember this because I threw it down on the ground. I literally did. I went, oh, hell no, this isn't me. And, I felt that inner voice said, hey, boy, deal with it. And I did. I dealt with it. And it took me right around 20 years to transform the personality that became my new personal reality. We're going to talk about this a little bit more of the spiritual side. If you want, join my LinkedIn show, the Renew. We showed the Renew show for this, but this is right, always winning. Um, we have a couple of shows. So when you want deeper understanding into the concepts of the spiritual part of you, your three-part being: spirit, soul, body. Empathy is actually a spiritual trait because it deals with the heart. So, enough about that. But the platform that we've used to solidify this without just hypothetical theorism or nostalgia is, let's evaluate your behavioral traits, and then of course your leadership patterns, because we are the sum total of patterns. And then of course that ties to decision making styles, and then your relational intelligence. So this shifts the conversation from who seems like a leader to, as we always talk about, who's neurologically operating like a leader, because that's a powerful intellectual position to be in. So if you're the head of HR and you're looking for leadership, it's not just the resume. The resume is out, the assessment is in. because it substantiates the ability of work production and leadership traits without involving too much emotional dysregularity that affects operational outcomes. I think that's probably the easiest way to say it, as I'm trying to speak more English instead of science. But a good faith perspective here is that there's a famous proverb that I love that says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath." That's emotional regulation. And we see women in the Bible, Deborah, Esther, Abigail, these women demonstrated leadership not through force, but through discernment and relational wisdom. And I think that's an important distinction, you ladies that are operating with this tender side, even if you're, like a Meg Whitman, prior CEO of eBay, or some of the great leaders now in tech, that if you're only operating in one space of neurological intelligence without neurological regulation, then this limits you to the optimization of your full functionality. And that's what I'm introducing, and that's what I'm coaching to get in touch with that side. And it reduces the anxiety, the depression, the fear, the angst, the emotional dysregulation that leads to chronic illness. Of course, with my background in health and fitness and mental wellness, I'm an advocate of health. So it's like, okay, we've helped you create $1 billion company. Now what? I coached a guy that sold his company for $40 billion. All of a sudden he started have heart valve issues. Okay, a lot good the money was if you couldn't save your life. I think Steve Jobs is the epitome of this. All the money in the world couldn't save him. We need to rewind back, because a lot of the executives that I coach at Apple who were with him at the time said he was very emotionally dysregulated, you know. And that's something to be aware of, not something to criticize. It's just say, wow, can we learn from the brilliance of Steve Jobs in tech? Yes. Can we learn from the behavioral traits of him as well? Yes. Hopefully, Tim Cook has adopted that. Right. And so that's why I want to talk about how this nervous system is literally this topic of nervous system leadership, which I'm going to go into in the next couple of weeks, is just exploding, because the future of leadership will not belong to the most dominant personality. That's the 80s mentality. The year 2026, it belongs to the most regulated nervous system. And I think that's the topic of discussion that I want to have, is that how do we do this? So next week, we're going to dive into we talked last week. If you haven't gotten those, it was about the power of a woman under attack. I call it the most powerful force in the world. I go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. That, of course, here we have Satan attacking this unbelievable woman in the Bible, who, by the way, was just as powerful and knowledgeable as Adam was. So, end the dispute about women being weaker in general. He doesn't attack the man, he attacks the stronger of the two. This is the book of Coach Ron. But I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's only one creature in there who had the ability to procreate life. Although Adam did have creative power in his mouth, we're talking about babies creating life, procreation. Um, he hits her first, right? So now this week we're on. You've got the advantage, lady. And next week, we're going to talk about the regulated woman. And that's the nervous system leadership. So you don't want to miss this, because when you start tapping into adversity, intelligence, regulation, authority, that's a powerful arc that you now have as part of your narrative of leadership. And I think the future of leadership depends on emotional intelligence. I'm convinced of it. And here at our offices, we're seeing that women who use this edge, that you do have an empathetic advantage, you have a creative advantage, all of those stats that I mentioned. Let me repeat those real quick, because I really want you to hear this, ladies, because this is not, even though I'm passionate the way that I talk, this isn't motivational fluff. This is actual concrete evidence talking about how your prefrontal cortex, your decision maker, your limbic system, your emotional processing, and the nerve all align into one symmetrical process that does a many-fold blessing in your body and your business. And that is regulate you so you optimize your health. You're alive a lot longer on the earth. You're more proactive for your children and your family. And then simultaneously, you are on your A game, girl, for your business and your enterprise. Um, Studies examining leadership during crisis. I had it right here. I was going off memory. Under crisis show, where was that tagline? Here it is. Oh, here's the first one I wanted to mention. A study from Harvard Business School reports that 71% of employers value emotional intelligence more than technical skills when evaluating leadership potential. Now, studies examine leadership during crisis found that women were often rated as more effective leaders in high pressure situations. Why? Because the limbic system stays online, emotional system. Now, let's talk about those two pathways because Tim, my co host, in fact, Tim, if you want to jump in any questions, I want to wrap up so you can elaborate on anything. But let me make this quick point here. Two processes that govern great business. It is not just an organization, it is an organism. You are a living, breathing woman, man, if you're chiming in, who is operating under tremendous pressure with several POVs and pivots through the day, through the week, and through the month. Does that require emotional regulation? We can all agree that it does, because if you're not emotionally regulated, you are going to make knee jerk reactions that could lead to catastrophic events. I wrote a whole book on it, 30-second solution, how one 30-second decision could cost, like my one client, 20 million. Okay. How about the other client I coached? He said, Coach Ron, you saved me 100 million. So these are important pivots that you need to understand as a woman. You got the edge. Let's just slow it down a little bit and move more into regulation. Tim?
Really good advice. So I want to dive into a couple of different things here because
Yeah.
first of all, the stats you were sharing about women, it's so empowering. I don't know how many women, I know some women know this, but at least in my corporate career, most women didn't know that.
Right.
And a lot of women, my question here is the value that you're talking about and that you're bringing that is intuitively in many women.
Hmm.
How do they combat the self-sabotage talk that's devaluing the great value that they already are?
Oh, God, that is such a powerful, powerful question, Tim. The self talk is the narrative. And that narrative, what we call, has a psychological loop. And studies show that when you learn to interrupt that loop, that is what sets the vagus nerve, which is governed by pressure and non pressure. And that's what I was going to explain earlier. So, this is a good point. Understanding your biology is monumental to understanding your leadership. To this point about decreasing the negative narratives that all of us sabotage ourselves in, even me. We call it pattern interruption. Harvard study did a study on this, and I'm just going off the top of my head, just so you know, that there was a 71% decrease in that false narrative when you learned how to do pattern interruption. And we have a tool here at our coaching practice called the CR tool, cognitive replacement. It's a fancy word for saying, okay, I'm saying to myself, you're so pathetic. I'm saying to myself, gosh, why did you make that decision? And you're being abusive, just let me use that word, to your own psyche. So, what that does is if you're not interrupting it, it is developing and reinforcing neural loops that begin to increase. So, it actually gets easier for you to be negative. Well, flip it around, cognitive replacement. You're going to interrupt that pattern by saying to yourself, wrong. You're not that. Okay, you made a mistake. Admit it, because humility precedes honor. So it's a principle. Go ahead and bow low within. Just don't abuse yourself by saying to yourself, I am pathetic. I am a loser. I am such a jerk. You are so dumb. Wrong. Those are just the aftersets, if you will, of maybe some poor decisions, but that is not your identity. And I think that's the real root, Tim, is that we're trying to disrupt identity loops. that would then forfeit future progression and development and decision making. So interrupting those is monumental. Monumental.
That is so huge. I love that. The
Huge.
disrupting identity loops. The
Yes, you become your own disruptor before you build a technology that disrupts. That's how I
yeah,
like to coach my female CEOs, is that don't forget that you're the first disruptor,
that is powerful. You hear
right?
that, ladies? You're the first disruptor. That
Yes.
is very, very
Now let
powerful.
me reinforce this because those meta, I have those stats here. The meta analysis showed women tend to score higher in core emotional intelligence dimensions. Empathy, so be more empathetic with yourself. Emotional awareness, so be more aware. Interpersonal communication, hear that? Intra, not inda, independent, not codependent, interdependent. This is where the spiritual asset comes in. So if you're not using this component, you're actually missing out on a major aspect of leadership development. This is monumental. I mean, all the greatest leaders in the Bible bowed a knee, did some meditation, got quiet, because that's that conflict management epicenter. Is that the first conflict you want to manage is within yourself.
That's really good. So I want to go back and dive into this word that, at least in my experience in corporate America, all the big companies and all the trainings and all that stuff I've gone through
Mhm.
for 20 plus years, that word empathy.
Yes.
There's a lot of definitions about empathy, and frequently it's confused with sympathy and apathy.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I want to spend a little time, get your take on these three words, and then dive really into empathy
Okay.
because there's so much confusion on this
Yeah.
topic.
Yes. First let me just exercise some humility here because to be a coach, everyone thinks I've got it all together. And I don't. This was an area for me that I didn't understand. I didn't understand empathy. It was actually a form of self-centeredness. I didn't realize that. Now I'm not pointing at you, I'm pointing at me. Because we can get so absorbed, rightfully so, on the responsibilities of our lives. I had a family of four to provide for, single family income. We made the decision that my wife would be a stay-home mommy, and I was in agreement with that. But then later on, the pressure began to build. I started to use guilt that was coming out of my subconscious because of a lack of empathy. So you say empathy versus sympathy, empathy versus compassion, even empathy versus emotional intelligence, Tim. And then you have cognitive empathy versus empathy, emotional empathy. And then you have empathy versus kindness and leadership. And it's really important that we should probably do a whole episode on this, but just for the sake of time today, in fact, write this down, Tim. Let's do the key differences in human emotional awareness, empathy versus sympathy. And I'll teach on this because I want to actually get more studies. I know it off the top of my head, but I want to get the latest. Let's define empathy just as we wrap up the show. Empathy is the ability to perceive. It's what I use called coherence. So if you're an incoherent person, you're not coherent, then you automatically cannot perceive. Your perception is limited, let me say it like that. Your understanding is limited. Your appropriation to respond is limited, right? And to basically emotions and the experiences of another person. You reduce your capacity. And psychologists generally describe empathy as having three components. You have cognitive empathy, like I mentioned, which is the capacity to understand another person's perspective. So I teach this with CEOs that you do know a lot. That's why you, the man, you, the woman, but still collective insight gives you an advantage. There's wisdom in a multitude of counsel. You don't have to make the decision, but embrace it. Then you have the emotional effective empathy, which is the ability to emotionally resonate with what another person's feeling, not necessarily understanding, but just attach some type of emotion like, I'm sick today. Well, you may not be sick today, but you have been sick, right? So don't say, get some backbone. Say, hey, take some time off. Your health is number one. You initiate that frequency out of your mouth as a superior leader, well, not superior, but as a senior level leader, man, that frequency carries weight. That could actually bring stability to the vagus nerve of that employee, and automatically they could go into remission because we're now learning that our behaviors are affecting gene expression. So if I'm behaving like an alpha male or alpha female, headstrong, dominant, I got to stay on control, can't let people get to me, they need to know. All of that is sending the wrong vibe. It's actually weakening your team. And then, of course, the
That's
last one
good.
is compassionate empathy, Tim. This is my one that I really love because the motivation to take supportive action once another person's need is understood. I am going to take supportive action once I understand your need. And in leadership science, empathy is often described as the neurological bridge between understanding people and then influencing them. So this is actually a powerful bridge that you're tapping into of great influencers. You want to be an influencer? It's at the epitome of empathy.
That's awesome. So
Yeah,
powerful. Very
powerful.
powerful.
Yeah.
So the next question I have is, you and I are men. For the men that are watching this, how do they
Amen.
start their journey unlearning this like you and I have and are on?
Yeah. The first place that you start is on your knees. I don't believe in God, Ron. Well, you should start because it's no mistake now we're in 2026, not the 1900s. Although there was a deepening then and there's a deepening now. I mean, wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes. I mean, the signs are all around us. And this is really for someone whose heart has been touched, which another first gate opener would be go quiet for a little bit and do some introspection work on, for example, let me use myself as an example as we wrap up. When I was going through the emotion dysregulation that I was under, the quieter I became, the more I could listen to my own heart. And the heart was saying, you're not a bad person. You're doing bad things. You're responding bad ways. And I say, why do I do that? Ask the question. Why? Because that's the opposite of pride. Pride doesn't ask why. The ego kicks in and it begins to say, justify your behavior. You're under pressure, which may be true, but let's get to the deeper reason why. Why did you get yourself into this situation in the first place? And what is dysregulating you? For me, it was a combination of things. It wasn't just one thing, but let's start with the biggest one, financial pressure. So you could be operating, a 40, $50 million company and still have financial pressure. The billionaire that I coached had financial pressure. So it doesn't go away. It's how you learn to manage it through emotional regulation. And so I realized that one of my roots, it wasn't my ability to perform. It was because I was operating in fear. And
Mm,
so what you do is you build a wall around that fear because you don't want to show anybody your fears. And it comes off crass, short, rude, flip it, deflectatory, which what I would do. I would constantly deflect. No, that's not true, but you do this. Well, this is the reason for this. Well, my parents were that, or this client bailed out. You're deflecting. And so the first place to start for us men is to get quiet. Ask yourself deeper questions. What is it that's bothering me? And then, of course, I like to say, pick up the phone and make an appointment because you're worth it. If you don't value you, you won't pay for things for yourself. The people that I work with, they value themselves, and that is the number one predictor of success. All wealthy people had one thing in common that I've worked with. They all value personal development as a core competency and a value system. And so through this introspection work, you will develop principles and become a person of principle, and you'll become a person of value.
Absolutely wonderful words.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts?
Yes, this has come from my college courses called University of Hard Knocks. I, I wish I wish I could tell you that I'm a perfect human being, but I'm really not. I am, but you know the difference is I'm in pursuit of perfection, even though I know that I'll never achieve it, Tim. I know that that is not humanly possible. So the final thought is live to be your best version of yourself today. Everyone else is already taken. We need you. And it starts with the emotionally regulated person. I'm Coach Ron Kardashian. Tim Boyko, till next week, this is always winning in leadership.